talk about Chapter 3, the important topics and some problems. So first of all, we're going to do you need to know a contribution margin income statement. So if you've watched the prior video, you heard me talking about making some formulas on a piece of paper and trying to figure out which one it will go in. Contribution margin income statement is sales minus variable cost equals contribution margin minus fixed cost is operating income. The relevant range is the range at which you're operating at, where fixed costs in total stay the same and variable costs per unit stay the same. So in the prior chapter we talked about jawbreakers, and we were selling jawbreakers, and you needed 2 machines if you made more than 4,500 or some number. So the relevant range was 0 to 4,500 because that's where I need 1 machine, and the fixed costs are whatever the fixed costs are for 1 machine. The relevant, if I'm going to talk about more than 4,500 units, then the relevant range is what the fixed costs are, the range at which the fixed costs in total stay the same. Also in that same problem, our cost per gumball was 40 cents if I made up to 4,500, but once I made above that, the variable cost went down to 36 cents each. So the relevant range is important because there's several assumptions in all of this stuff, and one is that your fixed costs in total will stay the same. So you don't argue, oh, my fixed costs will go up if I double production. No, you tell us how much you're going to make, and we determine the fixed costs for that range where fixed costs and variable costs per unit stay the same. Relevant range. Variable cost per unit and fixed cost in total stays the same. Break even and target profit in units. Again, that can mainly be worked with, let me pause. Okay, so most of the problems can be solved by this. Selling price times X minus variable cost times X, number of units. So selling price times the number of units is our sales, right there. Variable cost times the number of units is our variable cost, right there. Fixed costs are right there, and I get operating income. So this equation doesn't subtotal for contribution margin, but this one's horizontal, this one's vertical. Sometimes a problem it's easier to solve vertically, and sometimes a problem it's easier to solve horizontally. It's just up to you. So break even and target profits, you can solve them with this, or you can, and if you need to know how to get from this equation to this equation, go back to the prior video and watch it. I'm not going to go back through it. So break even in units is fixed cost divided by contribution margin. Break even in revenues is fixed cost divided by contribution margin percent. Target profit in units, fixed cost plus target profit divided by contribution margin. In revenues, fixed cost plus target profit divided by contribution margin percent. You can use the same formula here as I said before, because at break even, target profit is 0. When I have multiple products, basically I determine the contribution margin of each product, multiply by the sales mix, add the result together, and then take the break-even amount, which will do some problems in that. Margin of safety is just how far above break-even I am, so you can either do it in revenues or units. And then operating leverage we'll talk about a little bit later, but operating leverage is contribution margin divided by operating income. Okay, for this problem, it's this chapter, and when you solve some problems, I would suggest that you always, and you don't always need it, but it doesn't take too long to get it, to get your selling price and variable costs on a per unit basis, because that's how you solve it, and your fixed costs on a total basis. I've had many people make mistakes when fixed costs are given on a per unit basis, and then they plug it in there and they take, so fixed costs are given for 10,000 units. So let's say fixed costs are $10 for 10,000 units. So fixed costs are $100,000, okay? And so basically then the problem will say, okay, so what are fixed costs for 11,000 units? And people want to go and change this to 11,000, and the answer is that. And the answer is no. Fixed costs were given for 10,000 units, and so I compute what they are, and then fixed costs will always be that. Just sometimes the problem wants to know, I need to know the fixed costs are $10 each because I need to know how much I'm going to sell each product for. So make sure, just a good hint, determine fixed costs on a total basis, variable costs on a per unit basis, selling price on a per unit basis. This handout also has some chapter 4 in there, but we're going to focus on chapter 3. Okay, so we're going to go through these hopefully relatively quickly. You can print out this handout on your for Moodle, but again, like always, work them out yourself. Watching me will only, you can watch me get better. You need to practice them yourself. So try them without me going through this and then work on them. So the Brewer Company manufactures and sells, make this a little bit bigger, sells pens. Currently 5,400,000 units are sold per year at 60 cents per unit. So I'm not really sure what we're going to do, but I'm going to just do this over here, 5 million. So that's my sales. I'm not doing a very good job at a plus sign in there. Okay, so fixed costs are $860,000 a year, and variable costs are 40 cents per unit. So doing great. All right. So the question is, what is our current annual operating income? So I know that sales minus variable costs is contribution margin. Contribution margin minus fixed costs is operating income. So my operating income is $220,000. The second question says, what is the present break-even point in revenues? Well, I want to make sure that this is 0. So I can either put it in this equation and solve for 0. So my selling price is 60 cents. My variable cost is 40 cents times the number of units. My fixed costs are 860,000, and I can solve for X when my operating income is 0. I can take my shortcut here. It's fixed costs. So my fixed costs are 860,000 divided by my contribution margin. And I'm going to do both break-even in units and break-even in revenues. So my break-even in units, fixed cost divided by contribution margin per unit is that many units. Okay, pause this. Okay, so I have 4,300,000 units to break even, or I can do fixed cost divided by contribution margin percent, because this asks for the break even in revenues. So when I want the break even in revenues, I'm going to set that equal to 100%. Okay. And then I want what percentage this one is. So variable costs as a percentage of sales. So for every sales dollar, 67% is variable cost, and then 33% is my contribution margin. So now I can do fixed costs divided by contribution margin percent. And I see that my break-even sales and revenue is 2,580,000. Okay, so let's double check this just to see. So I have this, I said, is my break even in units, and my selling price is 60 cents. So as you can see, I get my $2,580,000. So this equals that. Okay. Next one, compute the new operating income for each of the following changes. And I put formulas in these so I can change them. So I've got a 6 cent per unit increase in variable cost. So I can change this to 46. And I can see that I have, if I increase my variable cost by 6 cents, I have a loss of $104,000. Okay, now next one, a 20% increase in fixed costs and a 20% increase in units sold. So now I need to change this back to 40. It's not really clearing the problem. Okay, and so the question says a 20% increase in fixed costs. So I'm going to have 86,000 plus 0.20% times. So my fixed costs are 1,000,000 320,000, and a 20% increase in units sold. So I'm going to have this one be okay, and I can see my number is 264,000. Okay, I will let you kind of go through the rest of those, just practice those with your handout. If you have any questions on them, you can ask me about them, but I'm just simply changing these numbers according to what it says on those. Okay, let me pause this. Okay, we're going to do this one next. Now this one does margin of safety and CBP analysis. So we sell office organizing units for small business. The current selling price per unit is $320. Operating income for 2012 is $400,000. Based on a sales volume of 12,000 units. Variable costs of producing the units are $100 per unit, plus an additional cost of $20 per unit per shipping and handling. So that's also a variable cost. So I have 120. Their annual fixed costs are $2 million. So notice that the problem didn't really need to tell us fixed costs or operating income. I could have figured that out. Okay, so let's make sure I've got this, put a formula back in there. Okay, so I have $400,000. Okay, calculate Creative Solutions break-even point and margin of safety. So the first thing I need to do is figure out their break-even. So break-even is fixed costs divided by my contribution margin. And this will give me my break-even in units, 10,000. So my margin of safety is simply how far above break-even I am. And so my margin of safety in this particular case is 2,000 units. Another way we could do this, so margin of safety is 2,000 units. If you look on your handout, you can see that. Another way we could do that is fixed costs. Oops, did I get the fixed cost? Divided by my contribution margin percent. And I could get my margin of safety in dollars. So I'm selling 3.84 minus 3.2. So I have 640,000. So let's see if that works. I said my margin of safety was 2,000 units. And I'm selling them at $320 each. So again, that equals. So I double checked my answer there. In 2013, they expect that variable production costs will increase by 20%. Okay, so this again, you can kind of go through these on your own. Ask me any questions if you have, but this is just kind of how you set it up. I do it on Excel just to show you because it's quick to go through each of them, but you certainly need to try them both ways, by do it by hand and on the computer. Okay, this one I put in here because it is, you're trying to figure out their fixed costs based on when you have a tax rate. So I'm going to throw it into this problem and I'll change it in just a second. I'll write out the numbers and I'll go over here and calculate it. Then I know 6,200 are my revenues, so selling price times X is my revenues, so 6,200 are my revenues. And then I'm going to subtract my variable costs times the number of units minus my fixed costs, and that's going to equal my operating income. Okay, so I'm going to change these numbers as I go along. So net income after taxes is one right here, is 1,700. Okay, I have an income tax rate at 40%. Notice this 1,700 is after taxes. So if I have a 40% tax rate, I know that I get to keep 60% of it. So 60% of this side is going to equal 1,700 because that's what is after taxes. And my operating margin is 70%, so my contribution margin is 70%. That means basically selling price minus variable cost is my contribution margin, and it is 70%. So I can now rewrite this, go back in here, 70% times 6,200. Okay, so I can rewrite this as selling price X minus variable cost X equals fixed cost. I can rewrite that as selling price minus variable cost is contribution margin times X minus fixed costs equals operating income. Okay. Also notice I could rewrite this also for other problems, not this one, but contribution margin times my number of units equals my fixed costs at break even, because this is 0. Okay, so now I'm going to solve for that. The first thing I generally do is divide this side by 1,700. Let me get that number, 2833. So I'm going to rewrite this. So I'm going to copy it down. Okay, and I'm going to divide both sides by 1,700 by 0.6. So, and so then I'm going to have 1,700 divided by 0.6. So change that to 0.7. 1,700 is 2833. Okay, so 0.7 times 6,200 is 4,340 minus fixed costs equals my 2833. And so I can solve for my fixed cost now, and so my fixed cost equal 1,507. And again, you can look at the handout. I've got this handwritten on there. The next one, why might your boss be interested in their fixed costs? Because basically that tells how my contribution margin and my fixed cost. Let's say that I have my selling price is here. The selling price is $100, and my variable costs are $20. But I have $2 million in fixed costs, and I have 12,000 units. So you can see that I have a big loss. Okay, but sometimes if I have $100,000 of fixed costs, whoops, $1 million fixed costs, the lower my fixed costs are, the less risk I have. So if you think about it, if you wanted to start a new business, and all you needed to do was have a computer and sell product online, you can say, oh, that is low risk. I've already got my computer. I don't have to make an investment in my computer. So let's say, for instance, you're going to do taxes. Okay, and a version of TurboTax that you're going to buy is $100. I know that's pretty cheap there. But you can buy a version of TurboTax, and you can think, all right, well, if I don't get any customers, I've only lost $100. Alternatively, if you have a firm that has a high level of fixed costs, okay, so even this way right here, let's make it very, very low. Let's make it $1,000 of fixed costs, okay? And let's say that my variable costs are $95. Okay, even though I'm not making very much on each product, okay, I don't have much fixed costs, so there's low risk. So if you think about it, 1,000 divided by 5, I have 200 units that I have to sell to break even. Okay? However, if you think about this, if my variable costs are low, so I can make a lot of profit on it, but my fixed costs are high, I now have to sell 1,200 units because I have to sell a lot of units to cover those high fixed costs. And the amount of fixed costs that you have in relation to your business is called your degree of operating leverage. Okay, a lot of times in other classes you'll call this barriers to entry. So barriers to entry have to do with the fact you've got to buy a lot of stuff before you can get in. A lot of times scams often happen in industries where there's low barriers to entry. So for instance, I wanted to go around and knock on doors of some elderly people and say I would like to seal your asphalt driveway. Really, all I have to have is a broom, and I'm going to not go to the store and buy the asphalt coating until the homeowner pays me for it. So I don't have a lot of equipment needs to say, all right, I can start this one. So it's very low fixed cost. Okay, so degree of operating leverage, you can read the solution there. It can kind of tell you, all right, if I lose sales, they go to zero, I will still lose $60,000. As opposed to if this is $1,000, if I lose and have zero sales, I'll lose $1,000. So it's just the term called the degree of operating leverage. Okay, so second question, compute the degree of operating leverage and prove it by increasing sales by 10%. So I'm going to pause this a second so I can put it up. Okay, so this is our problem. Notice I didn't take it down to after taxes. I just took it down to operating income. Because in degree of operating leverage, you cannot factor taxes in. So this was 2833. So if you look back on the last problem, our tax rate was 40%. So this times 0.4 is 1312. So we had 28 minus my taxes is $1,700. So we're a little bit rounding. But I'm going to delete that. So here's your income statement there. So the first thing I need to do is compute your degree of operating leverage. Degree of operating leverage is contribution margin divided by operating income. So I'm just going to take that divided by that. Okay? So I have 1.53. And here's how you interpret that. If sales increase or decrease by X%, then operating income will increase or decrease by the degree of operating leverage times the X%. Okay. So let's prove this, and let's say we're going to increase sales by 10%. So right here, our operating income ought to increase by 15%. Or more specifically, 15.3%, okay? Well. All right, so let's try it out. We're going to increase sales by 10%. So this will increase 10%, so I take it times itself and 10% more. So I'll have 6820, okay? Okay, and so this one will, if sales in units, remember sales are selling price times the number of units. This is variable cost times the number of units, okay? So if my sales increase by 10%, from 1,200 units to whatever in the heck it is, so I'd need to delete that because that's a different problem. So this will also increase by 10%. And so my contribution margin, that fixed costs are fixed, so fixed costs will stay the same. And my new operating income is 3267. So I said if sales increase by 10%, so these are sales in units because I'm not saying my selling price is going to increase by 10%. I mean sales in units. So if sales in units increases by 10%, this will increase by 10%, this will increase by 10%, and that'll increase by 10%. So you'll see a lot of people just simply start there and increase contribution margin by 10%. Okay, so I said my operating income will increase by 15.3%. So let's see how much it increased. It increased by $434, and $434 divided by 2833 is indeed 15.3%. Okay, so I've just proven that. So now let's say if let's say my fixed costs were $25.07, okay? So notice that now my net income is $18.33. My fixed costs stay the same if my sales increase by 10%. I have these numbers here. So my net income went up by $434. I know that my degree if sales increased by 10%, then operating income will increase by 10% times 2.37. And so you can see it indeed does. Okay, so make sure you know that I could use 15%, 7%. I just used 10% to show you. So that's your degree of operating leverage. That's this problem. Again, I've got that same stuff written on the problem. So let me pause it. Okay, I'm just going to the handout solution just because it's a little bit easier. I already have the work done. Okay, so we have electronic spreadsheets. I've got two versions. Although the same physical product, we've got two. So notice the selling price is $195 for the new customers and the upgrade is $115. So basically I have two products. Okay, here's my variable costs. My variable costs are made up of both manufacturing and marketing. Can't find my cursor there. And 15 and 20, so my variable costs are 65 and my variable costs are 35. So selling price for the new, selling price for the upgrade, variable cost for the new, variable cost for the upgrade. Contribution margin is 130 or 80, and so then I can get the percentage, 130 divided by 95 and 80 divided by 115. So 67% and 69.6%. I'm also told someplace in here had to find it. Fixed costs are $16.5 million right here. 16 million. Planned sales mix is 60% for new customers and 40% for upgrade customers. What is the break-even point in units, assuming that our sales mix is attained? So the first thing I do is figure out my contribution margin. I can get my contribution margin percent for revenues, but this says break even in units, so I only need my contribution margin. Take it times the sales mix. My sales mix is 40-60, so 130 for the new times 60, 80 times 40 for that, so 78, 32, add them together. Now I do fixed cost divided by my contribution margin. I get 150,000 bundles. So those bundles are made up of 60-40, so 60% of the bundles are new, so 60,000, that's got to be the same. That's my A, my new, right here. And 40% are the upgrade. So I sell 90,000 of the new, 60,000 of the upgrade. Here I've checked it. So if I sell 90,000 at a 130 and contribution margin, I could do the selling price minus variable cost, but I'd be taking this times 90,000, that times 90,000 to get that times 90,000. So I'm basically just starting here. So 90,000 times 130, 60,000 times 80. I subtract my fixed costs. I have operating income of 0. If I wanted break even in revenues, I'm going to use this, the contribution margin percent. Take it times the 60-40. Add them together. Take fixed cost divided by contribution margin percent and get that. So I have 60-40. So those are my revenues, break even in revenues. And again, I can check it. So I'll take my break even in revenues. The contribution margin ratio is 66.7% of revenues. So I multiply that. This for my upgrade, subtract my fixed costs, and I prove it. So this part down here is just for a proof. Okay, so you can try these. Oh, if sales mix is attained, what is the operating income for 220,000? So again, units are sold, total units are sold. Okay, and so I have 220,000 total units. 60% of them are new, so 60% of the 220 are new, 40% of the 220 are upgrade. So 132,000 new times my contribution margin of 130. Again, you could take it times the 195 and subtract the 65, but this is just a shortcut. And the $80 on the other one, I have my fixed costs and I have 7.7. Okay. This number 3 you can try on your own, see the answers, just use it as kind of a test yourself, try it. And then the last thing is this kind of gives you the steps to get the contribution margin or contribution margin percent for each, multiply it by the sales mix, add it together, fixed cost divided by contribution margin, then split them out. Okay, and then the last one, we've got a little CVP analysis. So I'm going to take you through the taxes one and then let you work through the other ones on your own. So I have a selling price and variable costs and fixed costs and net income. And I have an income tax rate of 25%. Okay, this says the first quarter has happened and I have 3 quarters left. However, basically they say A, B, and C, but then they do number 1, and number 1 is actually go back to the original problem before A, B, and C. So if no changes were made, so we're not going to do any of those, to the selling price, determine the number of units that they must say to break even and to achieve its net income objective. Okay, so first to break even, fixed cost divided by contribution margin. My contribution margin is selling price minus variable costs, so $400 per unit. My fixed costs are $750,000, so fixed cost divided by contribution margin is $1,875. Okay, then the second one is net income objectives. Remember, I can't just say fixed cost plus target profit of $150,000 because I have income taxes. So I'm going to do it the long way. I'm going to put it in this equation. So I have selling price times X minus variable cost times X minus $750,000 equals $150,000. My income tax rate is 25%. So if I pay 25% of that in taxes, it goes to the federal government. 75% is left for me, and that 75% must equal $150,000. Your book just starts right here. Target profit divided by 1 minus the tax rate, which is 0.75. So I have 750 minus 350 is 400,000. I solve for X. X equals 2375. Okay. For part B, then, determine which alternative they should achieve. I'm going to let you work through this, but I will tell you that we have sold, during the first quarter, 500 units had been sold. So that's why 1/4 of the year is done already. So I've got 2 revenue lines. Some on the old units where I've sold 500 for 750. And then on the new units where I change these items, and you can kind of follow through that. So kind of hopefully that helps you out. Stop this.